The Vampire King's hand had been cold for 1,000 years, but Celeste Ashford felt only warmth when her fingers brushed against his at the charity gala, mistaking him for someone who needed guiding through the crowded ballroom. She did not see the white hair that fell like frost around his shoulders, the pale skin that seemed carved from marble, or the crimson eyes that had watched empires crumble. She heard only a voice, felt only the contours of a palm against hers, and said with perfect ease, "You seem lost. Would you like me to help you find someone?" Xerxes Gravesend, who had not been touched voluntarily by a mortal in 3 centuries, who commanded 11 vampire courts across the modern world from a throne beneath the city, who had forgotten what it meant to be surprised, found himself utterly still. The gala swirled around them in the grand ballroom of the Rothmore Hotel, a glittering affair meant to raise funds for medical research. And he had come only because his financial empire required the occasional public appearance. His human face, the one he wore when sunlight was safely absent and business demanded visibility, was known to the city's elite as that of a reclusive billionaire. But even in this disguise, mortals felt the weight of what he was. They kept their distance, offered nervous smiles, and never, ever reached for him first. This young woman, her dark hair pinned loosely at her nape, her eyes a soft brown that did not quite focus on his face, had touched him as though he were simply another person in need of assistance. Her white cane rested against her forearm, and she tilted her head slightly, waiting for his response with the patient expression of someone accustomed to awkward silences. "I am not lost," he said finally, and his voice came out gentler than he had intended. "But I accept your company nonetheless." She smiled then, bright and unguarded, and something in his chest that had been frozen for a millennium cracked just slightly. "I'm Celeste," she said, "and you're wonderfully honest. Most people pretend they know exactly where they're going, even when they're wandering in circles." "Xerxes," he replied, and watched her mouth the syllables silently, learning them. Her hand remained in his, warm and alive, and he realized she had not let go because she assumed he had accepted her guidance. He could have pulled away. He did not. "That's a name with history," Celeste said, leading him slowly along the edge of the ballroom, navigating the space with practiced ease. "Greek, isn't it? You don't hear it often." "My parents had grand ambitions," Xerxes said, which was not entirely a lie. His mortal parents, dead now for 970 years, had indeed chosen a king's name for their son. They had not known he would grow into it in ways they could never imagine. "And you navigate this chaos remarkably well." "I've been blind since I was 16, Celeste said without self-pity, just statement of fact. "That was 6 years ago. You learned to map spaces by sound and memory. This hotel hosts events monthly, so I know it pretty well by now. I volunteer with the foundation that's running tonight's gala." 6 years, Xerxes thought. She had lived in darkness for 6 years while he had walked through 1,000 years of perfect, terrible sight, watching everything and everyone he had ever known crumble into dust. She spoke of her blindness the way others might mention learning a new language, an adjustment rather than a tragedy. He found himself wanting to know every detail of those 6 years, and the 16 before them, and whatever future stretched ahead of her fragile, burning, bright, mortal life. They reached the terrace doors, and Celeste paused. "There's a garden out here," she said. "Quieter than inside if you'd like some air. Though I should warn you, I'm told I'm terrible at small talk and tend to ask intrusive questions." "I find I am curious about intrusive questions," Xerxes said, and meant it. He held the door for her, and they stepped into the cool night air together. The garden was lit by subtle pathway lights, and the sounds of the gala faded to a gentle murmur behind them. Celeste released his hand only long enough to orient herself, then reached out again, and he offered his arm this time, something courtly and old-fashioned rising in him. "You're very cold," she observed, her fingers resting lightly on his forearm. "Are you feeling all right? It's not that chilly out here." "I run cold," Xerxes said, which was perhaps the most honest thing he had told a mortal in decades. "A circulatory condition. Nothing to worry about." "Well, if you faint, I'll be absolutely useless at catching you," Celeste said, and her tone was so matter-of-fact and amused that Xerxes laughed, a sound that startled him with its unfamiliarity. When had he last laughed? The 18th century, perhaps, and even then it had been brittle, performative. They walked the garden path slowly, and Celeste asked her intrusive questions. What did he do? He managed investments, which was true. Did he enjoy it? He found it occasionally interesting, which was less true but not entirely false. Did he have family? No, not anymore, which was the truest thing he had said all evening. Where did he live? A historic property on the city's edge, heavily renovated, which was a polite way of describing the sprawling Gothic estate that sat above the entrance to the underground court where he ruled. In return, he learned that Celeste worked as a transcriptionist for legal firms, turning recorded proceedings into written documents with the help of specialized software. That she lived in a modest apartment downtown with a cat named Galileo, who was, in her words, a tyrannical fluffball with delusions of grandeur. That she had lost her sight to a degenerative condition called Rothstein's syndrome, rare enough that most doctors had never encountered it, progressive enough that she had gone from perfect vision to total darkness in less than 8 months. That she was saving money for a treatment option that might restore partial sight, though it was experimental and expensive, and she spoke of it the way one might speak of a pleasant but unlikely dream. "It doesn't define me," Celeste said when the conversation turned that direction. "Being blind, I mean. It's just part of the landscape now. Some people are tall, some people are short. I navigate by sound and touch. You adapt." "You are remarkable," Xerxes said quietly, and he meant it with an intensity that would have frightened him if he had allowed himself to feel fear. But he had not felt fear in so long that the emotion arrived unrecognized, dressed as fascination, as hunger, as something dangerously close to hope. Celeste turned her face toward him, not quite meeting his eyes, but close enough that he could see the flecks of amber in her brown irises, the slight asymmetry of her features that made her beautiful in a way that was entirely human, entirely mortal, entirely temporary. "You're just saying that because I haven't run away from your intrusive questions yet," she said, teasing. "Perhaps," Xerxes allowed, "or perhaps because you took the hand of a stranger and offered help without hesitation, and that is rarer than you might think." They talked until the gala began to wind down, until Celeste's phone buzzed with a message from her friend who had driven her to the event, asking if she was ready to leave. Xerxes walked her back inside, reluctant to let the evening end, and found himself asking if he might see her again. Celeste's smile was answer enough before she even spoke. "I'd like that," she said. "Though I should warn you, my schedule is unpredictable, and my cat is very judgmental of visitors." "I shall endeavor to win Galileo's approval," Xerxes said solemnly, and Celeste laughed, pressing a small card into his hand with her phone number written in raised letters he could feel beneath his fingertips. She left with her friend, a cheerful young woman who eyed Xerxes with obvious suspicion and positioned herself protectively at Celeste's side, and he watched them go with something that felt absurdly like longing. He returned to his estate as dawn approached, descending into the underground court where his kind lived in shadows and luxury. The throne room stretched vast and vaulted, lit by chandeliers that had once hung in European palaces, and his second-in-command, Lysander, waited with the patient expression of someone who had served the same king for 400 years. "You're smiling," Lysander observed, his own white hair pulled back in a severe style that matched his austere features. "That's unsettling." "I met someone," Xerxes said, and the words felt strange in his mouth, unfamiliar after so many centuries of meetings that meant nothing, conversations that passed through him like water through a sieve. "You meet thousands of someones," Lysander said. "You've never smiled about it before." Xerxes moved through the throne room to his private chambers, and Lysander followed, as was his privilege as second. The rooms beyond were appointed in dark woods and deep colors, books lining every wall, artifacts from a dozen different ages arranged with casual care. Xerxes had lived through history and kept pieces of it close, reminders of everything he had survived and everything he had lost. "She's human," Xerxes said, pouring himself a glass of blood from the crystal decanter kept for that purpose. The court had arrangements with blood banks, with willing donors, with a dozen different sources that kept them fed without necessitating the hunts of older, crueler times. "She's blind. She took my hand and asked if I needed help." Lysander was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was careful. You haven't felt anything for anyone in all the time I've known you. Forgive me for worrying that the first person to crack that ice is a fragile mortal who cannot even see what you are. She sees better than anyone, Xerxes said, surprising himself with the vehemence in his tone. She sees without the filter of fear that every other mortal wears when they're near me. She spoke to me as though I were simply a man. You are not simply a man, Lysander said gently. You are the oldest living vampire in this hemisphere, the king of 11 courts, and you have not been human for longer than some languages have existed. What happens when she learns the truth? It was the question Xerxes had been avoiding since the moment Celeste's hand touched his, and he had no answer for it. He dismissed Lysander with a gesture and spent the day in restless sleep, dreaming for the first time in memory, fragmented images of brown eyes and warm hands, and a voice that asked intrusive questions without fear. He called Celeste the next evening, and they made plans to meet for coffee, then dinner, then a walk through the city's botanical gardens at night, when Xerxes could move freely and Celeste could enjoy the cool air and the scent of flowers without the crowds of day visitors. She told him about her work, about the peculiar intimacy of transcribing other people's words, hearing their conflicts and resolutions play out in recorded voices. He told her about the art collection he maintained, the way beauty could anchor you through time, though he did not specify how much time he had lived through. You're wonderfully strange, Celeste said one evening as they sat on a bench in the gardens, her hand finding his with easy familiarity now, 3 weeks into whatever this was becoming. You talk about things like you've seen them from angles no one else considers, and you're always so cold. You're sure you're not ill? I am certain, Xerxes said, which was true. He was not ill. He was simply no longer alive in the way she understood life. And you are wonderfully warm. I find the contrast pleasant. Like a human space heater, Celeste said, laughing. Very romantic. But it was romantic, Xerxes thought. Everything about her was romantic in ways he had forgotten romance could be. The way she listened with her whole attention, her face turned toward him even though she could not see him. The way she touched his hand to emphasize a point, casual and unconscious, as though his skin were not marble cold and unchanging. The way she asked questions that cut through centuries of careful performance and demanded honesty, he had not given anyone in so long he had forgotten how. He was falling in love with her, he realized one night as he watched her laugh at something he had said, her whole face lighting with unguarded joy. He was falling in love for the first time in 1,000 years, and the feeling was both exhilarating and terrifying, a vulnerability he had not allowed himself since his mortal death. It was Lysander who brought him the information about Rothstein's syndrome, about the experimental treatment Celeste had mentioned in passing. It was also Lysander who brought the alternative, the older solution, his expression grave as he laid the ancient texts on Xerxes's desk. The court's healers could restore her sight, Lysander said quietly. The magic is old, but it's been done before for mortals who pleased the crown. It would cure the degeneration completely, permanently, but she would see truly afterward. She would see what you are, what we all are. And she would have to choose whether to stay in a world she had seen only through touch and sound, or run from it. Xerxes read the texts in silence, ancient languages flowing easily through his mind. The magic was indeed old, rooted in the blood bond between vampire and mortal, a gift given rarely and with purpose. It would require her consent, would require her to drink from him, just once, not enough to turn her, but enough to carry the healing through her body. And when she woke, she would see. She would see his white hair and white skin and red eyes. She would see the court beneath the city, the vampires who bowed to him, the reality of what he was. She would see everything, and he would have to watch her face as fear replaced trust, as understanding replaced innocence. I cannot keep this from her, Xerxes said finally. It would be monstrous to withhold a cure simply because I fear her reaction to the truth. Then you tell her everything, Lysander said. You offer the choice, but be prepared for her to choose the life she knows over the one that includes us. Xerxes spent 3 days in turmoil, a state so unfamiliar that Lysander watched him with barely concealed alarm. The court noticed their king's distraction, the way his attention wandered during audiences, the way he dismissed matters that would normally command his full focus. Whispers spread through the underground halls, speculation about what could possibly unsettle a ruler who had been unshakable for longer than most of them had existed. On the fourth day, Xerxes invited Celeste to his estate. She accepted with easy pleasure, curious about the home he had described but never shown her, and he sent a car to collect her when the sun had safely set. She arrived with Galileo in a carrier, apologizing that her cat-sitter had canceled last minute, and Xerxes found himself charmed by the tyrannical fluffball who emerged from the carrier with the imperious air of visiting royalty. "He's already judging your furniture," Celeste said as Galileo stalked around the entrance hall, tail high. "That's his measuring up face." "I hope I pass muster," Xerxes said, watching the cat with amusement. Galileo approached him, sniffed his leg with evident suspicion, then surprised them both by winding around his ankles in apparent approval. "Well," Celeste said, sounding delighted. "He likes you. That's rare. He barely tolerates me most days." They had dinner in his private dining room, a meal Xerxes had arranged through his human staff, and he watched Celeste navigate the space with careful attention, learning the layout, building her mental map. She asked about the art she could not see, and he described paintings and sculptures with as much detail as he could offer, painting pictures with words. "You love beautiful things," Celeste observed. "I can hear it in your voice when you talk about them." "Beauty is one of the few things that remains constant through change," Xerxes said. "It anchors us when everything else shifts." "Through change," Celeste repeated thoughtfully. "You phrase things like you've seen a lot of change. How old are you, really? I've been guessing early 40s, but sometimes you sound much older." It was the opening he needed, and Xerxes took a breath he did not require, a habit from mortal life that lingered. "Celeste," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something, several things actually, and I need you to listen to all of it before you decide how to respond." She set down her fork, her expression shifting to attentiveness. "That sounds serious." "It is," Xerxes said, "and I want you to know that everything I am about to tell you is true, even though parts of it will sound impossible." He told her everything. He told her about the 1,000 years he had lived, about the night he had been turned by a vampire whose name was lost to time, about the courts he ruled and the world that existed beneath the world she knew. He told her about the blood and the immortality and the weaknesses that came with it, the sunlight that would burn him to ash, the silver that could wound him, the ancient laws that governed his kind. He told her about the careful balance they maintained with the human world, the secrecy that protected both species from the chaos that would come if the truth were widely known. Celeste listened without interrupting, her face unreadable, and when he finished, silence stretched between them like a chasm. "You're telling me you're a vampire," she said finally, her voice very calm. "A 1,000-year-old vampire who rules other vampires from beneath the city." "Yes," Xerxes said simply. "And you're telling me this now because I have fallen in love with you," Xerxes said, and the words came easier than he had expected, truth that had been building for weeks finally spoken aloud. "And because my court's healers can cure your blindness. The magic is old and reliable, and it would restore your sight completely, permanently. But it requires you to drink a small amount of my blood, and when you wake, you would see. You would see me as I truly am, and you would see the world I come from, and you would have to decide if that is something you can accept." Celeste was very still, her hands folded in her lap. "That's a lot to process," she said after a long moment. "I know," Xerxes said. "And I am not asking you to decide tonight or even soon. I only ask that you think about it, about whether you want your sight restored, about whether you can accept what I am, about whether—" He faltered, and the uncertainty was so foreign that he barely recognized it in himself. "About whether you could love someone like me." "Someone like you," Celeste repeated, and then, to his shock, she laughed, soft and a little shaky. "Xerxes, I've been falling in love with you for weeks. You're kind and thoughtful, and you listen like every word matters. You're patient with my questions, and you describe things beautifully, and you let my ridiculous cat wind around your legs without complaint. The fact that you're apparently an immortal vampire is definitely surprising, but it doesn't change those things. You believe me, Xerxes said, stunned. Just like that. I believe you, Celeste said. Everything you've told me explains all the little things that didn't quite add up. The cold skin, the way you only ever want to meet at night, the odd phrasing that makes you sound like you stepped out of a different century. And honestly, you sound too terrified of me not believing you to be making this up. She paused, then reached across the table, her hand searching until he met it with his own. Show me, she said quietly. Not the healing magic, not yet. Just show me what you are. Let me understand what I can't see. Xerxes had not expected that, had not expected her to ask to understand rather than to run. He rose slowly, moving around the table, and guided her hand to his face. My skin is always cold, he said, letting her trace the lines of his jaw, his cheekbones. Always pale. I do not age. I have not aged since the night I was turned, at what mortals would consider 30 years old. Her fingers moved carefully, learning his features, and then he guided her hand to his chest, where no heartbeat pulsed. I do not breathe unless I choose to speak, he said, and my heart stopped beating 1,000 years ago. Celeste's expression was wonder rather than fear, her touch gentle. May I? She asked, gesturing to his mouth, and he understood. He smiled, let his fangs extend, and guided her fingertips to them. She traced the sharp points carefully, her breath catching. You could kill me, she said, not accusatory, just observational. I could, Xerxes agreed, but I would sooner walk into sunlight than harm you. That's very dramatic, Celeste said, but her voice was soft, affectionate. Very vampire king of you. I have had 1,000 years to cultivate dramatic tendencies, Xerxes said, and she laughed again, the sound releasing some of the tension that had wound through his chest. They talked for hours after that, Celeste asking questions about what his life had been like, what the world looked like through immortal eyes. Xerxes found himself telling her things he had never told anyone, the loneliness that came with watching everyone he had ever cared about age and die, the way he had stopped caring at all somewhere around the 3rd century, the slow hollowing out of emotion until he had been more statue than person. Until I took your hand, Celeste said quietly. Until you took my hand, Xerxes agreed, and treated me like I was simply someone who might need help. Not a monster, not a king, just a person. You are a person, Celeste said firmly. An unusual person with an extremely complicated backstory, but a person, and I would very much like to think about your offer. About the healing magic, because I would like to see your face, Xerxes. I would like to see this world you come from. But I need to understand what I would be choosing, all of it. The healing is not permanent binding, Xerxes said carefully. It would restore your sight, but it would not change your humanity. You would remain mortal with a mortal lifespan unless you chose otherwise, and that choice, if you ever wished to make it, would be entirely yours. I would never turn someone against their will. But if I wanted to be turned, Celeste said slowly, that would be possible, eventually. Yes, Xerxes said, if that was truly what you wished, after you had seen and understood everything it entailed. But I would want you to make that choice with full sight and full knowledge, not in blindness. Celeste nodded, her expression thoughtful. Let me think, she said. Not for long, I don't think. But let me sit with all of this and make sure I'm choosing clearly. Xerxes agreed, though every instinct screamed at him to rush her, to convince her, to secure her answer before she could reconsider. But he had lived 1,000 years and learned patience, even if that patience was currently being tested by emotions he had forgotten how to manage. He had his driver take her home with Galileo and spent the next 3 days in restless anxiety that alarmed his court even more than his earlier distraction. Lysander finally cornered him in his study, his expression exasperated. You are driving everyone mad with your pacing, Lysander said bluntly. Tell her you love her and let her make her choice. This limbo is good for no one. She is making her choice, Xerxes snapped. I am simply waiting. You are being insufferable, Lysander corrected, And I say this with 400 years of loyalty and affection. But watching you discover feelings after a millennium of ice is exhausting for those of us who have to exist near you. Despite his anxiety, Xerxes found himself almost smiling. I am that unbearable. Catastrophically so, Lysander said dryly. The entire court is taking bets on whether she accepts or runs screaming. I have a substantial wager on acceptance, so please try not to do anything that would sabotage my investment. Celeste called on the fourth day, her voice warm and certain over the phone. I've decided, she said. Can you come to my apartment tonight? I'd like to talk in person. Xerxes arrived at her building as soon as the sun set, taking the stairs two at a time with inhuman speed, then forcing himself to slow and knock on her door with mortal restraint. Celeste opened it with Galileo winding around her ankles, and she smiled in his direction, unerring despite her blindness. Come in, she said. I made tea, though I realize you probably don't drink tea. I can drink tea, Xerxes said, following her into the small apartment that smelled of books and cat and something floral he could not identify. I simply do not need to. They sat on her couch, Galileo claiming Xerxes' lap immediately with the entitlement of a creature who had never been denied anything, and Celeste turned toward him with her hands folded. I want to see, she said without preamble. I want your healers to restore my sight, and I want to see you and your world and everything you've been describing. I want to understand what I'm choosing. Relief flooded through Xerxes, so intense it was almost painful. And after you see, he asked quietly, what if you change your mind? Then I'll deal with that, Celeste said. But I don't think I will. I've been navigating the world by touch and sound for 6 years, Xerxes. I've learned to read people by their voices, by the way they move, by the small cues that sighted people miss. And everything I've read from you tells me you're good, lonely and ancient and maybe a little bit dramatic, but good, kind, gentle with me. I don't think seeing your face is going to change that. I fear it might, Xerxes admitted. I have seen mortals look at me with terror, with revulsion. I do not think I could bear for you to look at me that way. Celeste reached for him, her hand finding his cheek with the ease of practice. Then we'll find out together, she said. When do we do this? Tonight, if you wish, Xerxes said. My healers are always available, but I want you to understand what it requires. You will need to drink a small amount of my blood. Not enough to turn you, but enough to carry the healing through your system. It will not be pleasant, and you will sleep for several hours while the magic works. When you wake, your sight will be restored. Will it hurt? Celeste asked practically. No, Xerxes said. You will simply sleep deeply and wake with vision. Then let's do it tonight, Celeste said. I've waited 6 years to see again. I don't want to wait any longer. They went to his estate together, Celeste's hand in his, Galileo left behind with a neighbor who owed Celeste a favor. The court was waiting when they arrived, and Xerxes felt Celeste tense beside him as they descended into the underground halls, the air growing cooler, the sounds shifting from city noise to the quiet echo of vast spaces. How many vampires are there? Celeste asked quietly. In my court? 347, Xerxes said. They will all want to see the mortal their king has brought home, but they will not trouble you. I will not allow it. He led her to the throne room, and the assembled court fell silent as they entered. Xerxes could feel their curiosity, their shock, their speculation. He had not brought a mortal into their midst in 2 centuries, and certainly never one he claimed to care for. This is Celeste, he said, his voice carrying through the vaulted space. She is under my protection. Any who trouble her will answer to me directly. The threat was clear, and the court bowed as one, acknowledgement of their king's will. Lysander approached with the head healer, a vampire named Seraphine, who had practiced healing magic for 600 years, her white hair braided with silver thread, her expression serene. I understand the mortal wishes to see, Seraphine said gently, addressing Celeste directly. It is a simple working, child. You need not fear. I'm not afraid, Celeste said, and Xerxes heard the truth in her voice. She was calm, curious, ready. Tell me what to do. They went to Xerxes's private chambers for the ritual, Seraphine and Lysander attending as witnesses. Celeste sat on the edge of Xerxes's bed, her hands folded in her lap, and Xerxes knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Last chance to reconsider," he said softly. "No reconsidering," Celeste said. "I want this. I want to see you." Xerxes bit his own wrist, the sharp sting barely registering, and watched his blood well dark and red against his pale skin. He lifted it to Celeste's mouth, and she drank without hesitation, 3 small swallows before he pulled away, and the wound healed instantly. "It tastes like copper in winter," Celeste murmured, and then her eyes fluttered closed and she slumped forward into his arms. Xerxes lifted her carefully, laying her on his bed, arranging her with a gentleness that made Lysander raise his eyebrows. "She will sleep until tomorrow evening," Seraphine said, her hands glowing faintly as she checked the magic's progress. "The healing is taking well. When she wakes, her sight will be perfect, as though she had never lost it." "And if she cannot bear what she sees?" Xerxes asked quietly. "Then you will have learned something painful," Seraphine said, not unkindly. "But that is the risk of love, is it not? That the other person might choose to walk away?" The court departed, leaving Xerxes alone with Celeste's sleeping form. He sat beside her through the day, watching her breathe, watching the magic work its way through her system in subtle shifts of light beneath her skin. He did not sleep, did not leave, simply kept vigil over the woman who had taken his cold hand and changed everything. She woke as the sun set the following evening, her eyes opening slowly, and Xerxes watched as her pupils contracted, adjusted, focused. She blinked several times, her expression confused, and then she turned her head and looked at him. Really looked at him, her brown eyes clear and seeing, taking in his white hair, his pale skin, his red eyes, the sharp beauty of features that were not quite human. Her expression shifted through surprise, wonder, and something else he could not identify. "Oh," Celeste breathed, "you're beautiful." Xerxes felt something break open in his chest, some last frozen piece of himself melting under the warmth of her gaze. "You are not afraid," he said, and it came out wondering. "Why would I be afraid?" Celeste asked, sitting up slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. "You're exactly who you were yesterday, Xerxes. You just look different than I imagined. More," she paused, searching for words, "more like art, like something carved from marble and given life." "Most mortals find us unsettling," Xerxes said. "Too pale, too cold, too other." "Most mortals didn't spend weeks learning you by voice and touch first," Celeste said. "I already knew who you were. Now I just get to see it." She reached out, her hand cupping his face, her touch familiar now made new by sight. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving me this choice, for trusting me enough to offer it." "I would give you anything," Xerxes said, and meant it with an intensity that would have frightened him if he had not already been so thoroughly undone by her. "Anything within my power to give." Celeste smiled, bright and joyful, and then looked around the room, taking in the dark wood and deep colors, the books and artifacts, the evidence of centuries of life lived. "Show me everything," she said. "Show me your world." He did. Over the following weeks, Xerxes introduced Celeste to the court, to the underground city that existed beneath the mortal one, to the halls where vampires conducted their business and their politics. She met Lysander, who was stiffly polite and clearly protective of his king, and Seraphine, who was warmly approving of the mortal who had somehow broken through 1,000 years of ice. She met the court members who were curious and welcoming, and the ones who were suspicious of mortal influence on their king, and she handled both with the same calm grace she brought to everything. She saw the throne room where Xerxes ruled, the massive chair carved from black stone, and she saw him sit in it with casual authority, his white hair falling around his shoulders, his red eyes sharp as he dispensed justice and settled disputes. She saw the vampire he was, powerful and ancient and commanding, and she loved him anyway. They spent their evenings together, Xerxes showing her art galleries lit by moonlight, restaurants that catered to his kind, the hidden places where vampires and knowing mortals mingled. They spent their nights talking, Celeste asking endless questions about his long life, about the things he had seen and done, about the person he had been before grief and time had hollowed him out. "You're waking up," she observed one night as they walked through the city, her hand warm in his. "I can see it. You're becoming more alive." "I am falling more deeply in love with you every day," Xerxes said. "It is difficult to remain frozen when you burn so brightly." Celeste stopped walking, turning to face him fully, and her expression was serious. "I want to ask you something," she said. "And I want you to answer honestly, not with what you think I want to hear." "Anything," Xerxes said. "If I wanted to be turned," Celeste said carefully, "if I decided that I wanted to spend more than a mortal lifetime with you, would you do it? Would you turn me?" Xerxes was quiet for a long moment, turning the question over in his mind. "Yes," he said finally. "If that was truly what you wanted, if you had considered it fully and chosen it freely, I would turn you. But I want you to be certain, Celeste. Immortality is not romantic. It is watching everyone you know who is not like us die. It is centuries of sameness and change intertwined. It is beautiful and terrible in equal measure." "I've thought about it," Celeste said. "Every day since you told me what you were. And I keep coming back to the same answer. I want to be with you, Xerxes. Not for 50 years or 60 years until my mortal body gives out. I want centuries. I want to see the world change with you, to learn everything there is to learn, to have time to really understand what it means to exist." She paused, her eyes searching his face. "Unless you don't want that. Unless the idea of turning me is something you can't bear." "I want it so badly it terrifies me," Xerxes admitted. "I want you beside me for as long as this universe exists. But I am afraid of what the turning might cost you, of whether you might regret it after the choice is made and cannot be undone." "Then let me choose," Celeste said simply. "Give me the same respect you gave me when you offered to restore my sight. Trust me to know my own mind." It was the same argument she had made before, and it struck just as deeply. Xerxes looked at her, this mortal woman who had walked into his life 6 months ago and shattered 1,000 years of careful isolation, and he knew he would give her anything she asked for, including immortality, including forever. "If this is truly what you want," he said slowly, "then we will do it properly. Not tonight, not in haste. You will learn more about what it means to be one of us. You will meet others who have been turned, hear their experiences. And then, if you still choose this, I will turn you myself." Celeste's smile was radiant. "Deal," she said, and kissed him there on the street corner, warm and alive, and entirely unconcerned with the mortal passers-by who stared at the strange couple, the too pale man, and the woman who looked at him like he hung the moon. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of preparation. Celeste met vampires who had been turned recently and those who had been turned centuries ago. She heard their stories, the adjustments they had made, the losses and gains that came with immortality. She learned about the hunger, about the way blood sustained them, about the weaknesses and the strengths. She attended court proceedings, saw the politics and power structures that governed vampire society, and understood the world she would be entering. Through it all, Xerxes watched her with barely concealed anxiety, waiting for her to change her mind, to realize the weight of what she was considering. But Celeste remained steady, her decision unwavering, and finally, one evening as they sat in his study, she turned to him and said simply, "I'm ready." "You are certain?" Xerxes said, and it was not quite a question. "I have never been more certain of anything," Celeste said. "I want this, Xerxes. I want you, and the life we can build together, and I want all the time in the world to build it." The turning was a private affair, conducted in Xerxes's chambers, with only Lysander and Seraphine present as witnesses. Celeste lay on his bed, her expression calm, her hand in his, and Xerxes bent over her with a tenderness that made even Lysander look away. "It will hurt," Xerxes said quietly. "The venom burns as it changes you, but I will be here through all of it, and when you wake, you will wake to forever." "Then I'll see you on the other side," Celeste said, and tilted her head, offering her throat. Xerxes bit carefully, precisely, his fangs sinking into the soft skin over her pulse. He drank deeply, taking enough of her blood that the turning would take hold, and then bit his own wrist and pressed it to her mouth. She drank his blood as she had once before, but this time it was more, enough to flood her system, to start the change that would remake her from mortal to vampire. Her eyes fluttered closed, and her body went still, the death that came before undeath. Xerxes lifted her carefully, cradling her against his chest, and felt the moment her heart stopped beating, her breath stilling completely. For 3 days she would lie in this death-like state, and then she would wake as one of them. He did not leave her side for the entire 3 days, keeping vigil as he had when she slept through the healing. Lysander brought him blood, and Seraphine checked regularly to ensure the turning was proceeding correctly, and the court whispered among themselves about their king's devotion to this mortal becoming vampire. On the 3rd day, as evening fell, Celeste drew in a sudden, sharp breath. Her eyes opened, and they were no longer brown but crimson red, bright and clear and utterly changed. She sat up slowly, her movements unconsciously graceful now, vampire reflexes already settling into place, and looked around the room with vision sharper than any mortal could possess. Then she looked at Xerxes and smiled. "Hello," she said, and her voice was the same, still warm, still hers. "Did I miss anything interesting?" Xerxes laughed, the sound coming easier now, no longer foreign after months of relearning joy. "Nothing worth noting," he said. "How do you feel?" "Different," Celeste said, examining her hands, which were now pale as his, her skin taking on the marble quality of their kind. "Stronger, sharper, hungry, actually. Is that normal?" "Very normal," Seraphine said, stepping forward with a crystal glass of blood. "Drink this. It will help." Celeste took the glass and drank without hesitation, and Xerxes watched the way she moved, the way the hunger settled in her eyes and then eased as she fed. When she finished, she set the glass aside and turned back to him, her expression wondering. "I can hear everything," she said. "Every heartbeat in the building above us, every conversation in the halls outside. I can see in the dark like it's daylight. This is incredible." "Welcome to immortality," Lysander said dryly from his position near the door. "Try not to let it go to your head." Celeste laughed, and the sound was bright in the quiet room. She stood, testing her new strength, her new balance, and then crossed to Xerxes, taking his hands in hers. "Thank you," she said softly, "for trusting me, for giving me this." "Thank you for taking my hand in the first place," Xerxes said, "for seeing me when I had forgotten how to be seen." They were married 3 months later, a ceremony conducted in the court's ancient tradition, binding them not just by mortal law, but by vampire custom, a bond that would hold for as long as they both existed. The court celebrated with rare enthusiasm, feasting and dancing in halls lit by 1,000 candles, and Celeste danced with her vampire king, her white hair now matching his, her red eyes bright with joy. Lysander, watching from the sidelines, remarked to Seraphine that he had never seen Xerxes so thoroughly undone by happiness. "He was frozen for 1,000 years, Seraphine said, watching the couple with satisfaction. "She melted him. That is no small feat." "She took his hand," Lysander said. "That's all it took in the end. One blind mortal girl taking the hand of a vampire king and asking if he needed help." They settled into their immortal life together, Celeste learning the intricacies of court politics, the way power flowed and shifted among their kind. She proved to have a talent for diplomacy, for seeing through the layers of ancient grudges and pride to the core of disputes, and more than once Xerxes found himself deferring to her judgment in matters that had seemed intractable. "You were wasted as a transcriptionist," he told her one evening after she had brokered peace between 2 feuding court factions with such elegant efficiency that both sides left believing they had won. "I learned to read people by listening," Celeste said. "Turns out that's a useful skill in vampire politics, too." They traveled, Xerxes showing her the world he had seen change over centuries, taking her to places he loved and places he had avoided because they carried too many memories. With her beside him, even the painful places became bearable, the weight of history shared rather than carried alone. What was it like? Celeste asked one night as they stood on a cliff overlooking the ocean, the moon bright overhead. Being alone for so long. Like being carved from ice, Xerxes said quietly. Like existing but not living. I went through the motions of ruling, of maintaining the court, of managing the business of immortality. But I did not feel anything. I had stopped feeling centuries ago because feeling meant pain, and I was tired of pain. And now? Celeste asked, her hand finding his. Now I feel everything, Xerxes said, turning to look at her, this woman who had been blind and was now the clearest-sighted person he knew. Joy and fear and love and hope. You gave that back to me. You took my cold hand and reminded me I was capable of warmth. Good, Celeste said, leaning into him, because I plan on keeping you warm for a very long time. Years passed, then decades, and they remained together. Two vampires who had found each other across 1,000 years of loneliness and 6 years of darkness. The court flourished under their combined rule, and the mortal world above shifted and changed as it always did, technology advancing, societies evolving, but Xerxes and Celeste remained constant. On the 50th anniversary of the night they met, Xerxes took Celeste back to the botanical gardens where they had walked on their early dates. The gardens were closed to the public, but that meant nothing to vampires who could move unseen, and they walked the familiar paths hand in hand. I have something for you, Xerxes said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, ancient and beautiful, a ruby set in gold that had belonged to a queen 5 centuries past. I want you to have this. It has been in my collection for a long time, but it should belong to someone who wears it with life, not locked in a vault. Celeste took the ring, sliding it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. It's beautiful, she said. But you've already given me everything. Immortality, love, a place in your world. What more could I possibly need? Nothing, Xerxes agreed, but I wanted you to have something beautiful anyway. Because you deserve beautiful things, and because I am still learning how to express what you mean to me after 1,000 years of feeling nothing. You're doing fine, Celeste said, kissing him softly. Better than fine. You're doing wonderfully. They stood together in the garden, two vampires who had found love in unexpected places, and Xerxes thought about the night he had attended that charity gala, bored and restless, and going through motions he had performed countless times. He thought about the moment a blind woman had taken his hand, offering help without fear, seeing him more clearly than anyone with sight ever had. I love you, he said, the words still carrying weight even after decades of speaking them. I will love you for as long as we both exist, and beyond that, if such a thing is possible. I love you too, Celeste said. My vampire king who learned to feel again. Sometime later, after more than a century of marriage, after countless nights of conversation and travel and simply being together, Celeste approached Xerxes with a new question in her eyes. I've been thinking, she said, and her tone was carefully casual in the way that meant she had been considering something serious. About family, about what it might mean to have children, even as vampires. Xerxes looked at her in surprise. Vampire births were rare, difficult and dangerous, but not impossible. The ancient magic that allowed vampire women to conceive and carry children was complex, and it resulted in offspring who were born vampire rather than turned, a different kind of immortal with different strengths. You want children? He asked carefully. I think I might, Celeste said. Not right away necessarily, but someday. I was an only child and my parents are long gone now. I think I'd like to build something new, a family that can exist in this immortal world we inhabit. Xerxes considered this, turning the idea over in his mind. The thought of children had not occurred to him in centuries, had not seemed possible or even desirable when he had been frozen and unfeeling. But now, with Celeste beside him, the idea held unexpected appeal. If you want children, he said slowly, then we will have children. But you should know that vampire births are not easy, and the magic required is demanding. We would need Seraphine's help, and the pregnancy would last longer than mortal gestation, nearly 2 years rather than 9 months. I know, Celeste said. I've been researching, talking to other vampire women who have given birth. I understand the risks and the complications, but I still think I want it. Want to build something that's ours." They talked long into the night, discussing the practicalities and the emotions, the way children would change their life together, the responsibilities of raising vampire offspring. By the time dawn approached, they had made their decision. 3 years later, Celeste gave birth to their first daughter, a girl with her mother's features and her father's red eyes, perfect and small, and impossibly strong already. They named her Olivia, and she looked up at them with curious awareness, more alert than any newborn mortal child. "Hello, little one," Celeste whispered, cradling her daughter carefully. "Welcome to the world." Xerxes looked at his wife and child, this family he had never expected to have, and felt something shift in his chest, some final piece of himself settling into place. He had been alone for 1,000 years, had ruled from cold isolation, had forgotten what it meant to connect to anything beyond duty and power. And then a blind girl had taken his cold hand, and everything had changed. Olivia grew quickly, as vampire children did, reaching the physical appearance of a 10-year-old in just 5 years, her aging slowing then to something more manageable. She was curious and bright, asking endless questions about the world and the court, and both Xerxes and Celeste delighted in teaching her. When Olivia was 20 years old in appearance, though only a decade had passed, Celeste approached Xerxes again with the same careful expression. "I think Olivia would benefit from a sibling," she said. "What do you think?" Xerxes, who had discovered he quite enjoyed fatherhood after 1,000 years of never considering it, agreed readily. Their second daughter, Willa, was born 3 years after that conversation, and she proved to be just as curious and strong-willed as her older sister. The court adapted to having royal children in their midst, the ancient vampires watching with amusement and occasional exasperation as Olivia and Willa explored the underground halls with fearless enthusiasm, asking questions that often cut through centuries of tradition with childlike directness. "They're going to reshape the court," Lysander observed one evening, watching the girls debate some point of vampire law with a patience that would have been unthinkable in the formal courts of previous centuries. "Good," Celeste said. "The court could use some reshaping. Too much tradition can calcify into something brittle." Xerxes watched his family, his wife who had melted him, his daughters who had shown him what it meant to build something new rather than just maintain something old, and he felt gratitude so deep it was almost painful. He had existed for over 1,000 years, but he had not truly lived until that night at a charity gala when someone had taken his hand. The years continued to pass, the decades rolling by, and Xerxes and Celeste remained together, raising their daughters, ruling their court, and building a life that felt rich and full rather than empty and cold. They watched the mortal world change, technology advancing in ways that would have seemed like magic in Xerxes' youth, and they adapted as they always had, maintaining the careful balance between their world and the human one. On their 200th anniversary, Celeste took Xerxes back to the hotel where they had first met. The Rothmore had been renovated several times since that charity gala, but the ballroom remained largely the same, still grand and glittering. "I've been thinking about that night," Celeste said as they stood in the empty ballroom, having slipped in after hours with vampire stealth. "About how different my life would have been if I hadn't reached for your hand." "You would have had a perfectly good mortal life," Xerxes said. "Perhaps met someone else, fallen in love, grown old." "Maybe," Celeste said, "but I can't imagine it now. Can't imagine any life that doesn't include you, doesn't include Olivia and Willa and the court and everything we've built." "Nor can I," Xerxes said. "You changed everything, Celeste. You took the hand of a vampire king who had forgotten how to feel, and you taught him to live again." "You were never really frozen," Celeste said, turning to face him. "You were just waiting for someone to see past the ice to the person underneath." "Perhaps," Xerxes said, "but it took someone extraordinary to do the seeing, someone who looked with more than just eyes." They danced together in the empty ballroom, moving to music only they could hear, and Xerxes thought about the 1,000 years he had existed before this, the endless parade of nights that had blurred together into meaninglessness. He thought about the loneliness that had carved him hollow, the way he had stopped hoping for anything beyond the eternal maintenance of power and court. And he thought about the moment everything had changed, the instant a warm hand had touched his cold one, a voice asking if he needed help. That single moment of connection had unlocked something in him that he had thought permanently sealed away. It had reminded him that beneath the vampire king, beneath the ancient immortal, there was still someone capable of feeling, of loving, of building something beyond mere existence. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words encompassing everything he felt but could never fully express. "For what?" Celeste asked, though her smile suggested she knew. "For seeing me," Xerxes said. "For taking my hand, for choosing to stay even after you could see what I was. For giving me a life worth living instead of just existing to fill time." "Always," Celeste said. "For as long as we both exist, and beyond that if possible. You're stuck with me now, Vampire King." "I can think of no better fate," Xerxes said, and kissed her there in the ballroom where their story had begun, two immortals who had found each other across impossible odds. Outside, the city hummed with life, mortals going about their brief, bright existences, unaware of the ancient creatures that walked among them. The sun would rise soon, and Xerxes and Celeste would return to their estate, to their underground court, to their daughters and the life they had built together. But for now, they danced in an empty ballroom, a vampire king and the woman who had melted his frozen heart, and they were happy. After 1,000 years of cold isolation, after 6 years of darkness, after lifetimes of waiting for something they had not known to hope for, they had found each other. And they would have forever to build on that foundation, to create new memories, to watch their daughters grow, to rule their court with wisdom and compassion rather than cold authority, forever stretched ahead of them, vast and full of possibility. And for the first time in his 1,000-year existence, Xerxes looked at that infinity and felt not emptiness, but joy. The blind girl had taken his cold hand, and in doing so, had given him back himself. She had seen him truly when she could not see at all, had chosen him knowing exactly what he was, had loved him through the revealing of truth and the transformation into immortality. Some love stories were written in stardust and destiny. This one had been written in darkness and trust, in a moment of connection between two people who should never have met but who had found each other anyway. And it was perfect. Years later, when Olivia asked her father what it had been like before he met her mother, Xerxes considered the question carefully. His daughter was grown now in appearance, though still young in actual years, and she looked at him with the sharp intelligence that marked both her parents. "I was waiting," he said finally, "though I did not know it at the time. I thought I was simply existing, maintaining power, going through the motions of ruling. But I see now that I was waiting for someone to remind me what it meant to be more than just a king, to be a person capable of connection and love." "And Mother did that?" Olivia asked. "Your mother took my hand at a charity gala and asked if I needed help," Xerxes said. "She could not see my face, could not see anything at all, and so she judged me by my voice and my actions rather than my appearance. She saw past everything that others found intimidating or frightening, and she simply saw me, and that changed everything." Olivia smiled, the expression bright and warm in a way that reminded Xerxes of Celeste. "I'm glad she took your hand," she said. "Otherwise, Willa and I wouldn't be here." "Neither would I," Xerxes said. "Not really. I would have continued existing, but I would not have been truly alive. Your mother gave me that gift, just by offering simple kindness to a stranger." He found Celeste later that evening in their private library, reading by the light of the fire that burned for ambiance rather than warmth, and he settled beside her, pulling her close. "Olivia asked what it was like before I met you," he said. "And what did you tell her?" Celeste asked, setting her book aside. "The truth," Xerxes said, "that I was frozen, that you melted me, that a single act of kindness from a blind girl changed the course of 1,000 years. "Just kindness?" Celeste asked, teasing. "Not my sparkling wit or devastating charm?" "Those came later," Xerxes said, smiling. "First there was kindness, everything else built from that foundation. They sat together in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only came from centuries of knowing each other, of building a life together piece by careful piece. Outside their estate, the world turned as it always did, the mortal realm spinning through its brief cycles while the immortal one endured beneath. But in this moment, in this quiet library with firelight dancing across the spines of ancient books, Xerxes felt nothing but contentment. He had his wife, his daughters, his court, and most importantly, he had himself back, the person he had lost somewhere in the long centuries of isolation, all because someone had taken his cold hand and offered warmth without expecting anything in return. The vampire king had not loved for 1,000 years, had not felt anything beyond the distant obligations of power and rulership. But the blind girl had taken his hand, and in that single gesture of connection, had given him back his heart. And he would spend eternity being grateful for that moment, for that choice, for the extraordinary woman who had seen him truly when she could not see at all. It was, he reflected as Celeste leaned against his shoulder, the perfect love story. Not because it was easy or simple, but because it was real, built on trust and truth and the willingness to see past surfaces to the person beneath. The vampire king had found his queen in the most unexpected way, and together they had built something that would endure for as long as time itself, a love that had started with a cold hand and a warm heart and had grown into forever. And that was worth more than all the 1,000 years of emptiness that had come before it.